On this episode, we look at penetration testing and how to discover if your business is at risk.
At M2 Technology, we're on a mission to make IT accessible to everyone. Join us on our journey to demystify the ever-evolving world of business technology. Are you ready to get unplugged?
Welcome back to IT Unplugged. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Alexander.
And Alexander, I'm really curious. You've been tasked as our intern at M2 Technology to look into more penetration, vulnerability scanning, but you've had this interest before you came over to M2 Technology. So just kind of curious, what got you interested in penetration testing?
Well, I got to work with a lot of computers when I was younger, so I kind of like to do other things, go online, kind of try and break stuff. I was a very destructive kid, I guess, so getting my hands on different tools and just kind of like going around and trying to do other things was kind of fun. So
okay, so breaking stuff led you to penetration testing.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I feel like a lot of kids are gonna have a future then, just from breaking stuff. But you're specifically talking about technology, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we can kind of stay on this kid level, right? Like. Can you explain what penetration testing is to me, like I'm a small child? Because not everybody out there really understands what penetration testing is.
Yeah, so I guess a simple way to do it is kind of picture like your house. So there's this great example I just got taught. It's you think of your house as like your system or your computer. So you lock your front door, you lock your windows, you lock the back door, make sure everything's secure, so like your actual system is secure, and you don't let anything like left open so people can have like a free access into your home. I like to think of it like that. So penetration testing is kind of like testing the locks, testing the windows, seeing if everything's like locked down.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure you don't have the garage code on a Post-it note right outside it or something like that.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. And I could see why that might be beneficial for companies to kind of go ahead and do. Something that I'm kind of curious about, you mentioned these different vulnerabilities when we talk about, breaking into a house and stuff. What's the most, the vulnerability that you see that comes up the most when it comes to penetration testing?
Vulnerability the most I see, there's a lot, there's a few. I did my research a little bit beforehand. A lot is kind of like SQL injections, different kind of like manipulating like codes behind the scenes so people don't really detect it. So like a lot in like the URL, manipulating that with SQL can get your access through different security systems, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of. Can you break that down a little bit further? Because not everybody knows what SQL injection is. So, like, what does that kind of look like, and how would that be used? Do you like kind of have an example?
I guess not really a good example, but when you click different websites and you go to it generates your URL bar and different like things like in like the slashes that are grayed out, that's kind of the part where they can manipulate and put different things in and like direct you to different spots.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, on that URL when it said like /calendar 2023, you could change that 2023 to maybe like 2024. Like you can manipulate URLs all the time.
You can add anything into it, and then it gets really deep into it, like commands, so they can run different commands through it, and then they just have your system. It's quite scary.
Okay, yeah, that's super scary. All right. So, when you're looking at that penetration testing and, what's the biggest misconception that you kind of want to clear up when it comes to penetration testing and maybe companies that are looking to go ahead and take part in a penetration testing?
So the biggest misconception, I think, is penetration testing is kind of just like running a scan or using different tools. There's a lot more that goes into it. Like scanning and tools are the main part, but then like finding the vulnerabilities, like fixing them, making sure everything's like secured, like the risks and everything are like, remediated. If that makes sense. So like penetration's not just like, oh, I broke in, that's it. It's kind of like understanding how you broke in, how you got in, where to like shut that kind of stuff down.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm kind of thinking about it like, I go to the doctor for my yearly checkup, and they're like, yeah, you're 20 pounds overweight, and your blood pressure's high, and you got all this other stuff. If I just, like, go home and then eat another Five Guys burger and completely forget about it, like, it's useless, right?
It's useless. There's no point.
Okay.
That's
So
kind of the same.
Okay, yeah. So there definitely needs to be, like, an execution and follow-up after that point, you're saying. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I only want my doctor to tell me that I'm overweight every once in a while, right? So how often should businesses maybe do penetration testing? What do you think has been a best practice that you found when you've been researching and looking at the information?
Yeah, so getting to talk to with a lot of providers, I get to kind of get into their minds a little bit, pick their brains, and most of them told me like 2 times a year is kind of like the best practice. Getting like one early in the year, seeing what to fix, and one like later in the year to see if you're still keeping up with your security.
Okay, so like Q1 is that, hey, let's figure it out, and then Q2 is kind of like that checkpoint for like or maybe not Q2, but the second half of the year is did you actually do what we told you?
Did you step on the scale and lose those 20 pounds?
Lose those 20 pounds. Yeah. So that can be tough. Okay, and is there? I could imagine like this is a pretty heavy task to execute on for these companies. Is there anything when it comes to like AI and machine learning that's happening right now that might be changing that landscape a little bit when it comes to penetration testing?
Certainly. So pen testing used to be a lot of manual labor, and now a lot of companies are moving towards the automated side. So AI taking over, writing different scripts and different stuff that's kind of just like taking the manual side out of it and kind of just automating it. But that's a good thing too, because it's dropping the price down, dropping the cost down. It's faster, it's more reliable, it's like easier to use, it's more user friendly.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and as a business, I mean, penetration testing is not cheap, so that is nice. Can it, like, do you, in your opinion, can it truly try to find those weaknesses as good as a human yet, or do you think it's a little bit further off? I
think it's a little bit off. Most companies try to integrate both, so like some scripting, some automation, but mainly manual still, because the robot's never going to break anything harder than anyone else wants to, like as a human wise. So yeah, I think it's a little bit off, but it could definitely get there.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose everything changes so fast. I mean, you see AI and machine learning, and every 6 months seems like there's a new development that's out there, and you're like, whoa, I can do this now, I can do this, I can do that. So that does make sense. So just giving a little context, Alexander, you've come into M2 Technology, and you've already given some great feedback and added value to our C-suite for our other company, M2 Logistics, where you've gone and looked at the penetration testing and vulnerability scanning that we've done. You've reported on it, and then you've gone out there and looked for additional providers, maybe for future pen testing. And when you have these conversations and these presentations with C-suite executives, and you say SQL injection, and their face looks, I mean, they're not like, oh yeah, I read about that last week in the Wall Street Journal. No, that's not happening, right? So how do you break down those super complex things to a group of people that are still really invested in what pen testing does, but maybe they don't know the ins and outs of it?
So kind of how we talked before with like the housing thing, I think that's a really easy example most people can follow. So if your house gets broken into like through a different or like a certain way, like your window, and it's obvious to you, right? So you see the glass shards on the ground, there's like, it's sloppy. I think that's an easy way to follow pen testing. It's not like as simple, but it gives you like that visual of what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and what's kind of the response when you do those presentations and stuff like that? Like, do you think these are things that people in business have at like the forefront of their minds? Like, hey, we need to have an outside party figure out vulnerabilities in our company, or do you think it's mostly new for a lot of these people and companies that are looking at pen testing?
I think it's mostly new. I know cyber attacks have been around for quite some time now, but I think businesses are still not trying to like push for that defensive edge as much as they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I love that. Testing it in-house as much as you can and pushing it so then when it actually does happen, you're prepared. And that kind of pivots into cybersecurity posture of companies. Some are better than others. Where do you think penetration testing fits in to an overall cybersecurity plan?
I think it's really important. I think it's like one of the main things you should have in your plan, cybersecurity wise, because that's kind of the make or break factor of your security system. So if you're really like locked down, like nothing's getting through you and you don't have penetration like up there, are you really locked down? Are you really secure? So I think that's like one of the main things you should have.
Yeah, I agree with that, right? Like you only know it's like how do you describe it, right? Like you can put all these things in place, but you can't really sleep at night until you know that somebody's like tried to kind of break it and,
Right.
and knock it down a little
Yep.
bit, right? See how strong you really are. So penetration testing is interesting because you're paying someone money to try to break into your company or
Yep.
your house. Okay. So what are the ethical considerations that should be put in place when it comes to somebody trying to break in and steal the information or trying to get the crown jewels of your company?
Yeah, so like ethical concern, like not stealing things. So you got to kind of like have like a written document or like a partner agreement kind of thing. So like don't come in and break stuff, get access, show you can get access to our files and such, but don't like extract, because then that could lead to a leakage and then a data breach, and then all your information's out to the public, which shouldn't happen during a pen test. So just keeping in mind of like, hey, I'm going to break in, I'm going to show you that I can, but I'm not going to start taking your files and start moving some stuff and banking and all that different stuff that you have secured.
So how is a business supposed to trust them though? Like how are they supposed to go, hey, I trust that you're not taking the stuff and hiding it and going somewhere else with it later on?
Yeah, so that's kind of like choosing your provider. So trying to pick a provider that's like been in the game for like, somewhat years and has different like accolades or different like achievements in their business, instead of like, hey, I want to go with someone who just like popped up in West Appear like 2 years ago. Let's go. And then they just like fall off the face of the earth after they give you your pen test.
Sure. There's like a pen test company in West Appear right now that's listening, and they're like, oh no, they just ripped on us.
Yeah,
so
right.
Like,
they're fake.
Yeah,
Don't go with them.
Yeah, we can't go with them. No, that's a really good point. And there is that level of trust there. And when it comes to, let's say something like that would happen, how quickly would it spread across to all the other companies that potentially use them or the other penetration testing companies? I mean, how fast would that news spread?
It spreads really quick. Am I allowed to say CrowdStrike at all, or?
Oh yeah, you can say CrowdStrike.
Okay.
You're fine.
That's good. Yeah. So like the CrowdStrike thing, right? So they push an update. It happened, and instantly the internet blew up, and all the airports went down. It's like that happens just like that. Even like small pen testing companies, if you get breached and you say their name online, it's no one wants to go with you. No one trusts you anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's that reputation thing, right? It's the same thing with cybersecurity, and it's a company that's in your local area, and they get breached, and everybody's like, oh, I don't know if I want to go with them anymore, But yeah, it's the same thing. It's just that trust is so important in that specific area. Okay. Let's role play here a little bit. I'm an internal IT person. You're the big boss man that comes over, and you're like, we're doing pen testing. Okay. What would I want to do as an internal IT person, or a company, I guess as a company in general, to prepare for this first pen test?
Well, you would go around making sure everything's like secure. So you'd kind of check things you wouldn't normally check on your day-to-day basis, just to make sure that your company looks good on that pen test, so you can get that big gold star and be like, yeah, we're so secure, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at too, right? So if I'm an IT person, I know this is going to happen. Are they, like, there's got to be kind of a balance there of not doing the things you wouldn't normally do, or not doing the things that you wouldn't normally do, right? So you can get a true and accurate test. So, like, what are kind of, how do they make sure that happens?
I'm not really too sure on how that goes down. I know, there's an agreement, there's a day set and everything, but I think what they should do is kind of talk to the owner and, like, whoever's really in charge, let them know, but kind of keep the IT guys out of it, so you can keep that, like, accurate representation of like, hey, what would happen if we actually did get attacked, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I'm kind of curious on what some companies do, you know what I mean, for things like that. I think about like going to the dentist, right? Like when you're going to go to the dentist that day, you probably brush your teeth in the morning, and then, your appointment's at 11 and you brush it again, and then you floss, and you're like, ooh, I gotta, like, I'm gonna get my gold star at the dentist. But, like, it doesn't really show, hey, you haven't really been taking care of your teeth this entire time. So you kind of like faked them out a little bit, right? So you're paying a good amount of money for this pen testing. The last thing you want to do is put a bunch of Band-Aids over all of your holes, like right at the last minute.
Exactly.
And then be like, good job, even though you didn't really fix the things that you need to be fixed. So yeah, I think it might be a little bit of a balance as you go through. What are some other benefits of a penetration test for companies that they might not know about?
So a lot of pen testing kind of reveals like hidden errors or exploit or like vulnerabilities waiting to happen. That's kind of a good thing. A lot of things pen testing could do as well for businesses is social engineering. So testing your employees, that's a big thing I see. So if your employees aren't trained on phishing attacks or anything like that, and pen testers come in and do that, and they just compromise your entire company because of your employees just clicking on fake emails, that's a really important thing that should be trained.
Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely see that. And that brings up an interesting point, right? Like you talk about testing employees. Maybe there's a certain area of your business that you need more testing on than somewhere else, right? Is there like a defined scope when it comes to that penetration testing where maybe it's like, hey, knock on this window a little bit harder, or or like don't touch this shed over here. All right, we keep going back to the house. Like this shed's off limits. Let's not touch that. Is that something that happens?
Oh yeah, definitely. So most people or companies will give them a scope. Some people will even give them like certain tools they can use. So yeah, don't touch the shed, but on this window use this tool, and then on the big house use this, and this. So they can define the scope of what you're actually targeting, and then kind of like the variety of tools you can use on those different places.
Yeah. So it sounds like needs to be like a lot of communication and agreement beforehand, before anything actually takes place. Okay. And this is something that I'm going to bring up. I know it's off the cuff. We didn't discuss this at all. But when you were looking at pen testing, I was like, this must be a mistake, because there was like kind of a break in the middle of it. And can you kind of just like explain that process in pen testing where it's like, how open that communication is? Does that make sense a little bit?
Can you elaborate a little more?
Yeah. So like you did the assessment, and then you look at there was like the reconnaissance essentially, and then there was like maybe a scan, and then there was like a pause in the action, and it was like hey, we're gonna go back and talk to the business before we do this stuff. Yeah. And that was really surprising to me because I thought it'd just be like one thing. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I think it's kind of like saying like, hey, we found this, and it's like listing like everything that could be like attacked and exploited, but then making sure with the business like, hey, is it okay if we do this at this time, and like this might, like, I don't think they would affect your servers or take you down at all, but like if it did happen, is this an okay thing? Yeah. So just making sure that communication is really solid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that trust comes in again too, I believe. Yeah. Okay. And if you could give one piece of cybersecurity advice for every business owner, and I know this is going away from penetration testing a little bit, but we're talking about vulnerabilities, what would that be?
I think testing employees is probably one of the biggest things. Social engineering is one of the easiest ways into a system, like undetected, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think would be effective ways to train or like work with those employees? Like there's that crazy stat, 95% of all breaches are from employees. As an employee, of M2 Technology, as an intern right now, what do you think would be the most beneficial to run people through? Like what kind of training?
I think just like phishing attacks is like, I think that's the most common one. I really don't see any other social engineering ones. So it's like, fake emails, like make sure you check who's this coming from, what are they saying, is it anything like threatening, urgent, something fake, and then just like checking with like your internal guys, like, hey, is this a legit thing? No, it's not. Don't click that, or
Yeah, absolutely. We have that all the time, right?
Yep.
It's super, super common. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I know that you've done a lot of research into penetration testing, and this is a field that you want to go in as you move into college. And it's just been awesome getting to have this conversation and just the value that that you have brought to M2 Technology. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.